Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. Take two today on the final day of July. Hopefully, everybody that's tuned in now gets a much clearer audio. If not, we're going to have to probably can it for the day, but ran through some diagnostics. Should be good for round two here of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. So let me know in the comment section if it's coming in loud and clear on your feed. But we're going to have plenty to talk about today, even though it is the slow season of the NHL offseason. Most teams have a lot of their moves done. The bulk majority of their roster is set, except for maybe one or two moves. And the Pittsburgh Penguins are no stranger to that at all. They have a couple moves left to make this offseason, but they made a little bit of news as of late. And I don't know if you're hearing this, but it is pouring down rain outside. So again, apologies if that audio is coming in as well. Seems like everything is against this live stream today, but we'll continue to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins because that's what we're here to do. The Pens, they've continued their trend of late of signing the top prospects to their ELCs this summer. They did it immediately after development camp came to a close, signing both 2024 second-round picks, both Harrison Brunick and Tanner Howe. Last week, they made a huge signing, bringing in their top overall prospect, Brayden Yager, and getting him signed to his 3-year entry-level contract. Yager is ranked number 1 in my Penguins prospect rankings, but even though he is the top prospect, and it was great to see him signed a year after he was drafted, there was the one that happened yesterday that was more shocking to me than any of these other three. And honestly, if you asked me a month or two ago, I would have said this player was 100% playing next season back in Russia, whether it be the MHL or the KHL. But instead, the Penguins signed goaltending prospect Sergey Murashov to his 3-year entry-level contract, signaling his desires to come over and begin his journey in North America this season with the Penguins organization. Now, he was a surprise addition to development camp earlier in the month of July. Everybody was super excited that he was just there to begin with. And then, of course, in proper goaltender fashion, he goes out and he steals the show. He was, bar none, the most impressive player on the ice. And that is a group of players that included Ville Koivunen, that included Brayden Yager, that included 2022 first-round pick Owen Pickering, that included Brunick and Howe, as I already mentioned here. Sergey Murashov was the talk of the town that week because he was just stealing the show at Penguins prospect development camp. And then he stole headlines following one of the practices when he met with local media and said that, yeah, he has a decision to make, and that decision is going to come down in the next couple of weeks. He could either, one, sign his ELC, come over to North America for good, and start his professional journey in North America this season with the Penguins organization, or he could go back to Russia and play at whatever level they currently have him at. He's been tearing up the MHL, as we'll get to in a couple of minutes, but he was also really good at the KHL level last year as well for Yaroslavl Lokomotiv. So you look at what he is. We'll talk about what that means for the rest of the Penguins goaltending situation, because I know that is what comes to mind for everybody. But to me, Murashov is the 6th ranked prospect in the Penguin system right now. And to have him coming over earlier than expected is huge for the Penguins and for Kyle Dubas. We know what Dubas is trying to build, and that is a young core of players at the American Hockey League level that are going to be able to grow together and potentially become that next iteration of Penguins hockey once Crosby, once Malkin, once Letang is done. They want to start that from the ground up, and they've done a pretty good job of bringing in talent to the organization, but they just haven't been able to get them all together on the same ice yet. That's going to change this year. You look at the American Hockey League, Pickering is going to make his first full season as a professional coming over to the AHL. Tristan Brose is going to be at the AHL level this year. You have both Ville Koivunen and Vasily Ponomarev coming over. The three guys I mentioned earlier, Brunick, Howe, and Yager, likely going back to their WHL squads because they cannot play at the American Hockey League level. Again, of course, we've all talked about Yager potentially getting a 9-game sample size at the start of the NHL season before being sent back to Moose Jaw. But again, much remains to be seen about that. He has to impress the whole way throughout the summer, and it is a long summer from here to the start of the regular season. But Murashov's an interesting one, and it will bring with it some interesting questions for the Penguins goaltending depth throughout the organization. When you look at what he was able to do in Russia, there is no doubting the talent that this kid has. If you look at his last 2 seasons in Russia, the MHL, which is the minor system, the junior system over in Russia, 76 games played, 50 wins in those 76 games, a 1.72 goals against average, a 939 save percentage, and 15 shutouts. Just tearing up the junior system. And I know the next question becomes, well, what did he do whenever he got up to the professional league? He got a couple cups of coffee the last 2 seasons, 7 games played, 6 of them last season. He has a 4-1-2 record in the KHL, but still a 1.57 goals against average, a 927 save percentage, and one of his 7 starts, he also notched a shutout. So this guy has some ungodly numbers over in Russia. How is that going to translate? It's different for everybody, right? Joel Blomqvist had tremendous numbers over in Europe. He came over to the American Hockey League last year. He was an AHL All-Star. He was amazing for them last season. Do we see the same from Sergey Murashov this year? That remains to be seen, but he certainly has a lot of potential, and he has certainly turned heads, grabbed the attention of not just Penguins fans, not just Penguins writers, but also the Penguins organization as a whole. They bring him over, and now that means a couple of things for the Penguins organization when you look at their goaltending situation. I don't think it means very much at the top. I've seen some people speculate, okay, does this mean that they're more willing to move on from Tristan Jarry? Does this mean that they're more willing to give Joel Blomqvist a shot as a 1B this season? I don't think it changes much at the NHL level. I think you're still looking at Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic going into the season. And I said it a couple weeks ago on our last episode of Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live that it seems like the best course of action for the Penguins and the most likely course of action for the Penguins is go into the season with Jarry and Nedeljkovic, hope that all three, Jarry, Nedeljkovic, and Blomqvist, perform way above what you're expecting and be able to potentially ship off Tristan Jarry, clear yourself of his cap space, and let Joel Blomqvist shine at the NHL level. That's the best case scenario, but again, a lot needs to go right for that to happen. I still feel like this doesn't signal anything in accordance with Tristan Jarry. It doesn't signal a move is coming more than you might have already believed a move is coming with Tristan Jarry. So that rules that out. But where it gets interesting is when you get down into the system. You look at the American Hockey League. You're looking at a very young goaltending tandem and Joel Blomqvist, who is, in my eyes, even though Murashov is an impressive young goaltender, Blomqvist is the unquestioned starting goaltender for the AHL team going into the season. Murashov joins him. It does demote newcomer Philip Larson down to the ECHL. Larson, a former 6th-round pick of the Detroit Red Wings, was signed back over to North America this offseason by the Penguins. They were hoping maybe he gets a fresh start, maybe he turns things up, and maybe he becomes a nice little piece in their organization. I think that he's still a decent signing, but I think this signals that either they're going to go with a 3-man rotation, which I don't particularly like, especially considering the situation they're in at the NHL level. I'd like to see both Blomqvist and Murashov get a large portion of starts. I don't want to see them have to split it with a third netminder. So I think that that means Philip Larson should go and start the season at the ECHL alongside Taylor Gauthier, which, you know, it's unfortunate for a guy like Gauthier who had a really solid year last year for the Wheeling Nailers of the ECHL. I believe he was named one of the top goaltenders of the entire league last season, but he was a guy that was hoping to potentially be elevated this year, build off of what he had, and then Murashov comes over, and then Larson comes back over, and all of a sudden there's a bunch of more roadblocks in front of him. It's unfortunate, but it's a good problem to have for the Penguins organization. You know, to bring it back to Murashov, the AHL, as I talked about earlier, is going to be vastly important for the Penguins moving forward because they're trying to do this shotgun rebuild, quick rebuild to where Crosby will still be playing when these young guns can get up into the lineup and they can start to shift into the next era. These goaltenders are going to be 1A, 1B, the most important players down there this season. Yeah, I'm excited to see what Tristan Brose does. Yes, I'm extremely excited to see what Koivunen can do, what Ponomarev can do, what Sam Poulin can do, because this is going to be a major year for him. Is he going to be able to build it up at the American Hockey League level and then make the jump to the NHL, because that's what's going to be expected of him this year. But the most important names at the American Hockey League level are going to be, one, Joel Blomqvist, because I would assume he does get some opportunities this year to play at the National Hockey League level, whether that's as a 1A or 1B or as a injury spot starter. I believe Blomqvist will make his NHL debut. That's a prediction that I will firmly stand behind. And then Sergey Murashov in his first year in North America. He's not a guy that you're going to see at the National Hockey League level. There are plenty of roadblocks in front of him, because especially the fact that he's going to have to get used to the North American game, similar to what Blomqvist had to go through last year. If that transition is made as seemingly seamless as Joel Blomqvist did, then we have to reevaluate after the season at how far out he is. Doesn't seem like it's likely that he'll play this year, not probably likely that he'll play next year at the NHL level, but he has certainly moved along faster to this point than we've expected. And as we know, development isn't linear, especially for goaltenders. Typically, they take a little bit longer to marinate, to get ready for the National Hockey League level, but these two young guys, Blomqvist and Murashov, the last couple of seasons, they've turned some heads. They have been very exciting, and they've been very interesting for the Penguins organization. So a huge week for the Penguins. A couple of weeks ago, they get Brunick, they get Howe. Those were nice contracts to sign last week. They get Braden Yeager, which was a nice prospect, which was a nice bit of news. But this one, which a month ago didn't seem like something we would have heard this summer, Sergey Murashov signing his 3-year ELC, leaving Russia, coming over and playing in North America this year. Huge for the Pittsburgh Penguins, huge for the Wilkes-Barre Scranton Penguins, and really huge for anybody that likes to watch Penguins prospects, because there's going to be a lot of young talent in Northeast Pennsylvania, especially the two guys between the pipes. Let's finish off this episode. It's an off-season episode, so I'm going to go straight to the questions. We got a couple of people in the chat here. Drop your questions if you have them. I'll try to answer as many as humanly possible, whether that be about these goaltenders, Murashov or Blomqvist, or these other prospects, guys like Yeager, Brunick, Howe. I'll answer all the questions, or if you want to go to anything else. Obviously, the Penguins offseason is at a slow point right now, but any questions you have about them, about anything else, I'll try to answer before we go here today. Let's go to Gunnar Murphy's question. Actually, let's start with Football Goat number 7. He threw this in the last failed live stream that we did whenever the microphone wasn't working. He says, Nikolai Ehlers to the Pens for a 2025 first rounder and a 7th round pick. If I'm on the Penguins side of things, I'm biting my tongue a little bit, because I don't want to give up first round picks. If you can try to maybe do a 2nd and a 5th, I would be more inclined. I think he would also maybe go for a little bit more than that, than a 1st and a 7th, especially on the Winnipeg side, because we know the Winnipeg Jets. We saw this last offseason when it was Mark Scheifele and Connor Hellebuck. Both of them spent the majority, if not all of the summer, on the trade block as two of the top names on everybody's trade lists. And then by the end of the summer, they both signed extensions. They both stayed in Winnipeg, and they both had really stellar seasons. Connor Hellebuck, Vezina Trophy winner. Mark Scheifele was Mark Scheifele once again, in the Winnipeg Jets. They might have been bounced in the first round by the Colorado Avalanche, but they were a very good team last season. So when it comes to the Jets and Nikolai Ehlers, again, I'll believe that when I see it. The fact that the noise has kind of gone down to a minimum, even for the slow season of the NHL. I'm not sure how likely it is that he gets moved at all, let alone to the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm also not sure how likely it is a guy like Kyle Dubas is going to part with a first-round pick when he has done everything in his power this offseason to make moves towards a rebuild. He's not saying that they're rebuilding. Nobody in the organization has said they're rebuilding. But if you look at the moves, I think it's pretty evident that in some way, shape, or form, this is the start of a rebuild for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and trading away a first-round pick, even if it is for a player of the caliber of Nikolai Ehlers, just doesn't seem to fit the mold of what their offseason has been to this point. Now let's go to Gunnar Murphy's question. Thank you, Gunnar, for throwing this one in. It says, summer question, but what are your thoughts on the Fanatics taking the jersey rights from Adidas? Opinions now that they've unveiled them. Overall, I loved the Adidas jerseys. I bought a couple of Adidas jerseys. I bought more Adidas jerseys than I did before Adidas took over, because I loved the shoulders. I loved really everything about them. So I was upset to see that they weren't continuing their partnership with the NHL. With Fanatics taking over, I don't have too strong of an opinion on it. Obviously, it is a dip in quality, especially for the jerseys that the fans are going to wear. The jerseys that the players are going to wear, there have been some issues with the MLB this year because they also switched to Fanatics. Typically, when I'm watching the game, though, it's not making any difference to me. The jerseys still look fine on television. The only exception is the fact that all of those players, the jersey is a different color, especially if you look at any of the catchers. The jersey is an entirely different color by the third inning than it was the first inning, simply because I don't think the quality is nice enough, and the sweat just absolutely drenches through the jersey, and you can see through them. So outside of the actual quality for the players on the ice, I'm not overly upset. The quality for the fans, I think, is going to take a dip. Fanatics has obviously had a reputation, and I think that even if they're at the top of their game, even if Fanatics, improves what they've been doing and tries to get out of this public perception of themselves, it's a step down from Adidas. So those are my overall thoughts. Gunnar, I appreciate you asking this. I think you asked this a couple of weeks ago, and I just wasn't able to get to it. But, I'm not too upset about it. I think the on-ice product is going to be fine. I'm worried for the fans because the jersey quality that we got from Adidas was great. Let's move over and answer some other questions here. Brandon says, Taylor Gauthier, Sam Poulin, Nola Chari to Columbus for Patrick Laine. I don't know how the cap would work, though. Regardless, I think we have too many goaltenders. We're doing it a disservice, or we're doing one a disservice otherwise. I'll say one thing. You can never have too many good goaltenders in the pipeline, especially because only two of them are 100% ready to go NHL this season. And that is Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic. And that's why Alex Nedeljkovic was brought back on a 2-year contract because, as of right now, the Penguins just don't see Joe Blomqvist as NHL ready. That's what that move signaled to me is, hey, they like Blomqvist, and everything that they have said is that they like Blomqvist, but he's just not ready to make that jump. And of course, you shouldn't expect him to be. He's only played 1 year of North American hockey. He was really good in that year. He was an all-star in that year. He was one of the leaders on that team when it comes to performance-wise that year, but you shouldn't expect him going into that next season to automatically be ready. Same goes for Murashov. He is not going to be NHL ready this season. He might not be NHL ready next season. So having these young guys is not a bad thing. To me, it's not a logjam yet because you have guys in the correct position. You don't have guys in a position under what they should be, other than maybe a Taylor Gauthier, right? That's the only name. And at the end of the day, is he going to be an NHL guy? Probably not. I don't want to put a ceiling on it. Maybe he can. He was one of the best, like I mentioned, one of the best ECHL goaltenders of the year last year. But as of right now, he projects to be an ECHL, AHL guy. And if somebody moves above him, he'll probably be one of the names that is talked about as, hey, will that guy also be bumped up the ladder? So I don't think that it's an issue to have too many goaltenders. I think right now it's actually a good thing, especially when there's so much uncertainty at the National Hockey League level, to have these really stellar, young goaltenders that are making their way towards the NHL. It's not a bad thing in my eyes. But let's go to your mock trade here, Brandon, because Patrick Laine is a name that has obviously resurfaced with him coming out of the NHL and NHLPA player assistance program this week, which means the trade speculation is going to reach another level for Patrick Laine. So here's your mock trade from Brandon for Patrick Laine of the Columbus Blue Jackets. It says Taylor Gauthier, Sam Poulin, and Nola Chari. I don't think Columbus is taking that. Not Don Waddell. Maybe if it was Jarmo Kekalainen and the old regime in Columbus that seemingly made their mistakes more often than they made the smart moves, maybe then you could fleece them in this way. But Don Waddell's not taking that move. Now, there is history between Waddell and Kyle Dubas, obviously recent history with the Jake Gensel trade getting done at the trade deadline last season. So there might be an open line of communication. The Penguins do need another scoring winger if they want to be better this season. And Laine, who knows what the price is going to be? That is going to be a hard one to narrow down because he's $8.7 million on the cap. That's going to be difficult. You would have to imagine Columbus, who is not in position to go for it the next year or two, are going to retain salary. But again, what does that do for the price? It's going to be draft picks, and it's not going to be small draft picks. It's probably going to be pretty important draft picks that's going to be in the Patrick Laine trade. It's just a matter of how many of them. what Columbus is looking for, and honestly, how much they're willing to budge to move Patrik Laine off the books. Again, I don't know if the door is completely closed on them keeping him. I'm not plugged into Columbus that much, but if they have any iota of a belief that they might actually keep onto him, it's only going to drive the price up more. So Gauthier, Poulin, and Achari to Columbus for Laine. The cap doesn't work, but we can throw that out because I don't think the return works for Don Waddell and the Columbus Blue Jackets. Mac Brunson says, I know this is probably unpopular. That's fine. That's what we like to get into here. But we have to trade Jarry. He's a bad goaltender, and I feel we've been trying to sugarcoat it for 5 years. The thing is, he's not always a bad goaltender. And that is the most frustrating part about it, is because when he's at his best, and Kyle Dubas made sure to run that company line throughout all of last offseason after the contract was signed, when he's at his best, he is a very solid goaltender. The problem is he is rarely at his best when it's most important. That's the biggest problem with Tristan Jarry. Do I think they have to trade him? I think it would be better for the Penguins to move on from Tristan Jarry. But again, you need to have somebody else on the other end that's willing to take on that contract. And as of right now, based on how last season ended and based on the contract that he has, not a lot of interest in Tristan Jarry because, well, to be frank, he was a backup goaltender at the end of last season. If they come in, he comes in, wins the starting job, because I do think it should be a competition in training camp this year. If he wins the starting job and has a stellar October and November and December like he has been prone to do over his career, maybe the trade value gets up high enough to where you can offload his contract. And again, like I said earlier, hope that Joe Blomqvist is ready to take that next step. Hope that Alex Nedeljkovic can do what he did late last season and become a starting goaltender that gives you a chance to win night in and night out, despite not being able to stand on his head and win you games. He keeps you in games and allows you to get the best opportunity to win them. If all that goes right, then yeah, it behooves the Penguins to listen and potentially move Tristan Jarry. But I'm not going to say that they have to trade him simply because this is a team that's not going for a Stanley Cup this year. They don't have to move him because they can honestly pay him to be a middle-of-the-road goaltender, which is what he is at this point in his career, on a middle-of-the-road team, which is what the Penguins are at this stage of their evolution. Let's go over to Mac's second question, who says, who are 3 or 4 of your favorite players to not play on the Penguins, current or past teams? I loved Carl Hagelin, but he did play on the Penguins. He would have been one of my top names. I always used to love playing with him in the video game NHL, whatever it was, 14, whenever he was still on the Rangers. I'd always trade for him and Zuccarello because it was like a cheat code for my third line. So much speed. You get around 2-on-1, cross crease. Everybody knows. NHL 14, that was the way to do it. But other players that have not played on the Penguins that I really enjoy watching, I loved watching Steven Stamkos. I still do love watching Steven Stamkos, but young Steven Stamkos was the best. I really, just really enjoyed watching him when he came onto the scene in Tampa Bay. And trying to think of some other ones. Currently not on the Pens. I like watching Fleury. He just makes it fun to watch him in net. I'm trying to think of other players that never played for the Penguins. Ovechkin is fun to watch, especially when he was younger and just absolutely a bull in a china shop. Hard to stop. Pavel Datsyuk was always a player that I enjoyed watching as well. He's called the Magic Man for a reason. The way that he was able to just sift through defenders, he was one of my favorites. And I really enjoyed watching Patrick Kane as well. Back in 2013, whenever him and the Blackhawks were absolutely destroying everybody in that season, it was a lot of fun watching him be absolutely dominant for the Chicago Blackhawks. So those are a couple of the names of players that I enjoyed watching in the past. Currently, you can't go wrong with McDavid. You can't go wrong watching, Austin Matthews is crazy to watch. Pasternak is crazy to watch. I'm trying to think of an underrated name. Cole Caulfield. Obviously a lot of people know of Cole Caulfield, especially those who, love watching World Juniors, but he is fun to watch play hockey. And even if the team is not good, I like watching Cole Caulfield as well. Let's go to Mark's question here, who says, back to 2017, knowing what we know now, do you still feel it was a good move for the Pens to protect Murray over Fleury, considering Fleury's cap hit back then, but also Murray's struggles after the back-to-back cups. If hindsight is 2020, if you knew Matt Murray was going to have the career that he turned out to have, you keep on to Marc-Andre Fleury. You just do, especially if you know that Marc-Andre Fleury is about to have a Vezina caliber season the following year. You hold on to Marc-Andre Fleury, even with the cap hit, and you make it work, because the goaltending, as we see right now, as for the last 3 seasons, goaltending is a very important position for every single team. And if you have that, it makes everything else that much easier to deal with. If you knew what we knew now in 2017, 100%, I would have held on to Fleury despite the contract, which wasn't even that bad, and I would have let Matt Murray go. But again, back in 2017, Matt Murray had just won 2 Stanley Cups as a rookie and looked like the real deal and looked like he was going to be a stud for the foreseeable future. It didn't end up being the case. It's unfortunate, but to go to your question, Mark, definitely. If I knew what I knew now and I could time jump back to 2017, 100%, Marc-Andre Fleury would not have gone to the Vegas Golden Knights. Let's go to Pittsburgh Heather's question, who says, do you think the Pens will sign Pettersson? And if so, will they do that after the Sid contract is announced? We did get a small update today on the Sidney Crosby contract from Rob Rossi of The Athletic, practically backing what he said earlier this month when he said July 8th, I believe, that a deal was close to being done. Of course, it's been multiple weeks since then. It's not done. But what he said today is, close was a subjective term. And basically, they left the negotiating table because things seemed good and they were fine with walking away, enjoying the rest of their summers, coming back and putting pen to paper. So that's the latest from Rob Rossi. As far as the Pettersson contract, there's been no noise about it. Do I think the Penguins signed Pettersson? That's a hard one because they've not openly admitted to rebuilding. They continue to say that they want to give Crosby and Malkin and Letang and Carlson an opportunity to compete this upcoming season and the year after. Marcus Pettersson does that. He's your best defensive defenseman. He's going into a contract year, but at the same time, every move that was made this offseason was made as if it was a rebuilding team. Rebuilding teams don't sign massive contracts to defensive defensemen. It just doesn't. So with that in mind, I'm leaning towards the fact that it probably doesn't happen. I'm leaning towards the fact that it definitely doesn't happen in the offseason. And again, I could be wrong, but it feels like for a team that has made moves that make it feel like a rebuild, they're not going to sign Marcus Pettersson to what I'm assuming is long-term 5+ year extension, because I'm assuming that's what he's looking for, without knowing what this looks like this year. Maybe if the Penguins have a great start to the season, they're in the top 3 in the Metro after Christmas, and they're a team that says, you know what? We didn't mortgage the future this offseason. We're looking really good right now. Yeah, let's sign Marcus Pettersson. Maybe that opens the door. But as of right now, if I was the Penguins, I would shy away from doing that, because the more realistic scenario is they end up right around where they were last year, bubble playoff team, and they may or may not have to look to sell at the deadline. If they're a team that's rebuilding, there's not many better pieces on the Penguins than Marcus Pettersson as a rental that you could trade away at the trade deadline. So again, do I think they'll re-sign Pettersson? If I had to be held to a yes or no question, it is a no. I don't think they are. Do I think there's a chance that they do if things turn around quickly? Yes, but again, looking at where they stand right now, it feels like they're going to, at the very least, walk into the season with Marcus Pettersson on an expiring contract, unless he's looking for much less than we all expect, which would be a disservice to him, which I don't think his agent would do. But unless that happens, I feel like re-signing Pettersson goes against what they've already done this offseason, and it wouldn't make too much sense as of right now. Twisted Sunrise says, I heard a rumor that Ovi wants to play with Sid. Would you make that trade? And what could this trade look like? Non-existent. I don't mean to be blunt, but Washington's never trading away Ovi. And Ovi did, in jest, make a joke about, I like what the Washington Capitals did. They were asking him about his offseason and the offseason that the Capitals had. And he said, I like the people that came in. And he was asked, I don't remember what the question was, but he said, Yeah, bring McDavid and Crosby. I'd like McDavid and Crosby here as well, jokingly, because he's Ovi and he is very unserious. So it was definitely a joke when Ovi said that. It would be a lot of fun to see those two play, and I made the joke after that happened. Man, if Ovi can get Crosby to go over to Russia when he's done in the NHL, that 1 year of, Dynamo Minsk, or that 1 year of um, SKA Moscow is going to be a heck of a lot of fun. It's going to be like the Globetrotters, because they've always been a lot of fun the last couple of years whenever they go to the All-Star games together. That trade is non-existent because the Washington Capitals, that is the only thing that they're looking for right now, is to have Ovi, one, finish his career in Washington, and two, break Wayne Gretzky's record as a member of the Washington Capitals. So it's unserious, just as unserious as Alex Ovechkin is when talking to the media most of the time. So it was a fun little clip, though. You should look it up. Let's go to Brandon's question. He circles us back to Patrick Laine. He says, what's a realistic trade for Laine, given that we can't fleece Don Waddell? I keep falling back to the Kessel trade package, but Kessel was a guarantee for 82 games and 20-plus goals. Laine feels like more of a gamble. 100% he's more of a gamble. This is a player that, take away the fact that he has been in the NHL Players Assistance Program for the last handful of months. He's had a lot of injury issues. When he's healthy, yeah, he's probably a guaranteed 20 goals when he's healthy and available. But again, that has been an issue for a couple of years in Columbus. And if he comes to Pittsburgh and is healthy and plays a full 82, and you can get him for a song, that is nothing but great for the Pittsburgh Penguins. But again, I still feel like the Columbus Blue Jackets aren't just going to hand him away, especially with the fact that, like I mentioned, they're going to have to retain salary. It is a hard one to nail down because it's a matter of who's out there that's trying to acquire Laine. But again, you probably know all this. I would say it probably takes, if there's retained salary, which I would imagine it has to be for the Penguins because they only have $3.5 million in salary cap space. I would imagine it takes a first rounder. I would imagine it takes another draft pick, maybe a third or a fourth rounder, and it probably takes one of your better prospects. I don't think it's going to be one of the ones that they just drafted in Howe or Brunick. It's certainly not Braden Yeager. He is untouchable, especially in a trade for a guy that has so many question marks like Laine. I would imagine it's probably somebody, maybe Ponomarev, maybe somebody in that trade that happened back in March. Maybe Waddell wants them back in one of his organizations and takes on one of them. Or maybe he wants a guy like Tristan Brose. Again, it's a matter of preference. What do the Columbus Blue Jackets want? But if them trying to nail down the outline of a trade for Patrick Laine that would make sense to me if I was in the Columbus's shoes, it would be a first, a third, and one of your top 10 prospects, probably one of your 5 to 10, because I don't think the Penguins are going to give up one of their top 5 prospects anytime soon. So probably 6 to 10, one of those prospects plus a first and a third, and likely some salary has to come back, I'd have to imagine, because otherwise this is just not going to work at all with the Penguins. It's a hard one to nail down, Brandon, but I'm hoping that answered your question a little bit as to what it could look like. Pittsburgh Heather says, any new rumors around Nick Robertson and what would a trade for him look like? That one's a little bit more interesting. It's not as expensive. I think it fits a little bit more for the Penguins because Robertson is 22 years old. He's somebody that has not shown his highest potential at the National Hockey League level. And he's also requested a trade to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that one's a little bit more interesting. I don't think he goes for a first. I could see that being a second round pick and maybe a low tier prospect. I could see it being maybe just a second round pick, or it has to be a third round pick and a low prospect, but it's probably going to be something along the lines of that. He's a restricted free agent. So there's no right now salary that comes along with him. He's not going to sign for more than what the Penguins have left to offer, which is around $3 million, $3.5 million. There haven't been any new rumors since beginning of July, second week of July. But at the same time, I still feel like that's their best option if they're looking to add a top tier scoring winger. If I had to rank it, like I said, it's probably Robertson up at the top, and then it's some mix of Laine, but that's going to be a lot of work. And then again, it's hard because there's not a lot of free agents. So those two, the most likely, with Robertson being far and away ahead of Laine because of acquisition cost, total cost, and also because of, all the uncertainty that surrounds Patrick Laine. The great Grizzly Bear Freedom Fighter says, would you trade for Ethan Bear and sign Brady Keeper? I'm blanking on Brady Keeper. I don't think Ethan Bear is available from the Washington Capitals. They just signed him last year and liked what they saw from him. So I would like Ethan Bear, but at the same time, I wanted him last year. I don't know where he fits right now with the Penguins. Let me bring up the Capitals Puckpedia and see what they got going on their defense as of right now, because they signed him last year. They're $10 million over the salary cap. That's why they bought Cap Friendly. But you look at their defense, they have Carlson, Waugh, Chychrun, Sandin, Van Riemsdyk, Faravari, Ethan Bear. Bear's probably third pairing guy alongside Trevor Van Riemsdyk. Maybe they don't need him, but at the same time, you look at the Penguins' right side, it just makes no sense. Because right now you have Carlson at number 1, Letang at number 2, and nobody is budging on that. Neither of them are going anywhere. And you have Jack St. Ivany as the third pairing right side defenseman. He's young, he's cheap, and he stood up to the challenge last year. So I'm big on giving him an opportunity. So I wouldn't go after him. Or Brady Keeper is a prospect. So that I'm not entirely. I don't know. He's not. He's 28 years old. No, I'm good on 28-year-olds. I'm giving the keys to the kingdom on the third pairing to the young guy, Jack St. Ivany. The great Grizzly Bear Freedom Fighter says, what would a Jari trade look like? As of right now, nothing. I don't think there is anybody out there that wants Tristan Jarry. And if they do end up trading Tristan Jarry at some point this season, it probably includes a roster player. And that depends on where the Penguins are going to need help. As of right now, that's potentially left side defense, depending on how much you trust Matt Grzelcyk, how much you trust Ryan Graves. But, Graves is going to stay in the lineup because, they can't afford to bench him or send him down. Obviously, Marcus Pettersson is going to stay in the lineup. So it's just a matter of how much you trust Matt Grzelcyk. I think left defense might be an area of need. Obviously, the Penguins still need some bottom 6 forwards. We'll see how the options that they currently have shake out. But I think that it would have to include a roster player because there would have to be some salary coming back the other way. And I think the Penguins would want some draft picks. If not draft picks, I don't know where Kyle Dubas is currently at because, things change over an offseason. But last year, during that Gensel negotiation, he said, I don't want draft picks as much as I want prospects that I know who they are and prospects who are a little bit closer to the NHL level. So I could see him potentially wanting to continue that trend as the Penguins try to build up a younger system and get younger, hopefully sooner, at the NHL level. So I would imagine it's probably a middle of the road NHL piece to help offset the salary, and either a third or fourth round pick or a mid-tier prospect, because the Penguins, as of right now, they're trying to trade them just because they signed that contract last offseason and they're not exactly happy with how year 1 went. Let's finish it off with this question from Mac Brunson. Thank you to everybody that's been in the comment section today. Says, super crazy world, but if the Blackhawks said Bedard for Crosby, do you do it? We are definitely deep in the offseason when we're talking about Bedard for Crosby. I like it. But if the Blackhawks offered that, that's a tough one. And it's obviously a far hypothetical for everybody that's going to jump in here. It is a far, far hypothetical because the Blackhawks would never do it. The Penguins would probably not say yes. And I think that's where I'm leaning to go to, because Bedard is the future, but are you going to spit in the face of your entire history of your organization? Are you going to spit in the face of a player that is not going to accept that trade in Sidney Crosby because he has a no move clause? But we are in the throes of kind of hypothetical land here with this even being offered. No, I think I'd stick with Crosby and I'd find another way to get competitive. Because again, you bring Bedard onto this team. Yeah, Bedard's pretty good. Yeah, Bedard's going to be pretty good in the future. You're probably not raising the level of your team the next 2 years, because I think Bedard and Crosby will be similar the next 2 years. And at that point, there's going to be other avenues to rebuild. Maybe not a guy the caliber of Connor Bedard, but I'm not spitting in the face of Sidney Crosby by trading him away to a team that, listen, him on the Blackhawks, if he went anywhere, I'd be upset. If he went to the Blackhawks, that might be, outside of the division rivals, that might be worst case scenario. There were a couple other ones in here I do want to jump on. In the Wild with Kyle, I like it. Says, would you trade for Vasily Podkolzin and Brock Besser? I would. I like both of those players, but again, I don't know if either of them are. Not, I don't know. Neither of them are up for sale right now. The Vancouver Canucks have not put either of them on the block, and there's not been any rumors about it. But I do like both players, and I do believe that Podkolzin was probably a player that was talked about last trade deadline season by Kyle Dubas and Patrick Alvin in those Jake Gensel negotiations, because Podkolzin is a very talented young player. So I certainly have interest in him. Problem is, I don't think the Vancouver Canucks are interested in getting rid of him. Heather says, is there an age that management look at an AHL player and determine that they're more of an everyday AHL player than an NHL player, i.e. Una Koppinen is 26, Kasper Bjorkqvist, who is back over in Europe, he's not coming back over to the Penguins, is 27, and Huntington is 25. I think there's a point, not with age, but there's a point in talent level and development that all right, this is a fringe guy, doesn't have much more to give at the NHL level. We kind of know what he is. Koppinen, he's an AHL player that what you saw last year is what you're going to get from Una Koppinen. He might step in for a handful of games when you're down a couple injuries. Fourth line guy, eats up about 6 minutes of ice time. That's what you get from him. So I think it's more so not with age, but with something like, but with development and knowing where they're at and knowing how much further they can go till they hit their ceiling. And the last one, Brandon says, do you think Graves will bounce back? It's hard to get worse than Ryan Graves was last year. That is where this conversation begins, is he can't possibly be worse than last year. But I do think that in a second year in the system, I do think that in a better position, because I do think he'll start as a third pairing guy alongside Jack St. Ivany with St. Ivany is a much better fit for Ryan Graves' style than playing alongside a Letang or a Carlson. They're paying him to play with those top two, but he just wasn't able to do it last year. You let him get his confidence up, because that is as big as anything. You play him with St. Ivany, you play him third pairing minutes, and you let him really get his feet underneath him this season. Because I think that's what happened last year is he came in, he started slow, and at that point, his feet were taken out from under him, and he just couldn't get back up to the surface. I think that's what you try to do this year. Start him off at a better position, let him get his feet underneath him, and hope that he can build back to being the guy that you paid him to be last season. So I do think he'll end up being better this year than he was last year. Whether he reaches that level that he's worth the contract, that remains to be seen. But I think at a base level, he'll be better than he was. But thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you to everybody for submitting your questions today. Again, sorry about the first go of things where the microphone wasn't cooperating. And also, just a heads up, going forward through Steelers training camp, it's going to be like this. We're going to try to get in at some point Wednesday afternoons, depending on the schedule and when the Steelers practice and stuff like that, because that is also part of my job, and I also have to cover that as well. But thank you to everybody for tuning into this one. You can follow us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you next time.